On this episode, we learn about the New Jersey Bike Walk Coalition. Then we learn about Bike and Walk Morristown. Finally, we drop in on the 14th New Partners for Smart Growth Conference in Baltimore. Stay tuned.
We're in Morristown, New Jersey, talking with Cindy Steiner with the New Jersey Bike Walk Coalition. What is the coalition?
Hi. The coalition is New Jersey's statewide advocacy organization for bicyclists and pedestrians.
And you say coalition, who belongs to coalition?
The coalition, we represent everybody who bikes and walks in New Jersey. We have about 25 different community level organizations that are doing advocacy work on the ground in their communities, and we work at the state level.
What sort of problems do pedestrians have in New Jersey?
Well, we have the nation's second worst pedestrian fatality rate when it comes to measuring a percentage of all road fatalities. It's twice the national average. We're above 30% of everybody killed on our roadways was a pedestrian, and the national average is about 14%. So that's a pretty significant problem, and it's pretty high on our radar. In fact, it's one of the most important things we talk about. And we focus on several things: policy, and engineering, infrastructure, and awareness education. When it comes to policy, we're working on a safe passing law that would provide pedestrians and bicyclists in roadways 4 feet when a driver passes them on the roadway. As far as policy also is all the complete streets work that we're doing. We have 113 complete streets policies passed in our municipalities around the state, and 8 counties also have a complete streets policy, and our state has a complete streets policy. But we have 565 municipalities in New Jersey, so we've got a lot more work to do. And we're also at a point where we're seeing those policies start to be implemented, and that's where a lot of our work is also.
What is a complete streets policy?
Complete streets policy is a commitment from the town or the governing body to design their roads to accommodate all legal road users, not just cars. So that means that you would provide accommodations for people who are walking and people who are riding bikes as well as driving. Now, this is something that you would do when you're building a new road or when you're doing any type of resurfacing or maintenance work on existing roadways.
So once you get municipality to pass the complete streets law, policy. Once they adopt a policy, what's next? I mean, what does it take to have it make a difference?
To make a difference, the townspeople, the governing body needs to keep in mind that this is the resolution that they've passed, and when they find themselves in a position of repaving, which is usually what they're doing, they need to think about accommodating all road users. Now, there's frequently a complaint of cost when you do this, but if you were to design these accommodations when you do the initial design of the road or when you go to repave, you include them at that time when you design your restriping, the cost is actually minimal. So it's very difficult to argue against doing these types of improvements when you look at our pedestrian fatality rate. And you look at the benefits that complete streets bring to a community from an economic perspective, environmental, health, and then of course safety, which we already talked about. Towns benefit dramatically when they accommodate bicyclists and pedestrians from an economic perspective, because it's a whole lot easier for someone who's walking and biking to spend money in the town than it is for somebody in a car who has to drive around and look for a parking spot. So towns that have made efforts to make themselves pedestrian friendly see dramatic economic benefits in commercial real estate. Vacancies disappear, tax revenues go up, you see new businesses come to town, and you generally just see a much higher quality of life in the community as a result of making these simple and inexpensive changes.
Now, when you're trying to make change in your statewide organization, how much of what you do has to be at the local level, and how much has to be working with at the state level, with the state government, state DOT?
It has to do with the jurisdiction for the roadway that we're talking about. Obviously, a large state project is actually easier for us because it usually affects a whole lot of people, but it's one governing body to work with. And because New Jersey has an award-winning state-level complete streets policy, it actually took one project for DOT to follow their complete streets project, and that was the Route 35 rebuild at the Jersey Shore as a result of Hurricane Sandy. And so now we feel that DOT is much more in a position to embrace complete streets, and we've been able to use them as a resource when counties and municipalities have a complete streets policy and go to implement it. We can refer them to DOT for some education on how to do it and encouragement and helping them understand why they would do it and how to do it.
How big a problem is that your local road designers are doing it the way they were doing it in 1956 and haven't caught on with the complete streets style of thinking about roads?
It's a pretty significant problem when you have 565 municipalities, 8 counties, and 1 state government, and each one of them has their own engineer, and only a certain percent, and I would probably guess about half, have even grasped the concept of complete streets. A lot of what we do is trying to educate and help them understand that this is not a huge roadblock. It's much easier to do and not as expensive as they perceive it. This 1950s mentality is how we frame it, of high speed, wide roadways, wide travel lanes, moving cars through as quickly as possible, is really part of the reason that we have such a high pedestrian fatality rate. And it's a mentality that really needs to change. That's highway thinking, and we're talking about community streets and downtown streets where people are out, walking and biking, and you should not be having your cars go through those downtowns at high speed. So those roadways are what we really are interested in focusing on. Getting those speeds down, narrowing those lanes, providing accommodations for pedestrians and bicyclists, such as crosswalks and crossing signals, bump outs, pedestrian refuges, bike lanes, buffer areas, even protected bike lanes. All of those serve to calm traffic, and that's a big part of how Complete Streets works, is actually to calm traffic and reduce traffic speed, and that's where you see the gains in safety also.
We're in Morristown, New Jersey, talking with Kendra Arnold with Bike and Walk Morristown.
Hi.
What is Bike and Walk Morristown?
Well, we're a local group just about Morristown. We're a nonprofit advocacy group, so we try to encourage the town to make things easier for bikers and walkers to get around. But we also do fun stuff, like we do weekly dog walks around town and bike rides every month, and try to get people out together doing fun things, but talking about improvements we can make to the town so we can all get around easier. So,
what sort of improvements have you been working on trying to accomplish?
well, to be honest, the town for walking, the town's been pretty great. So there's the DPW here is pretty awesome, and there's some roads. This is not one of them, but where they've been bumping out the crosswalks for curb extensions to make it easier to cross, and cars see you and they stop more readily for the crosswalk when there's not a light there. So they've been doing stuff like that. They've been they put in a whole bunch of sidewalk ramps this last year. They finished the main shopping district, and then they're working. I think they have plans for this side of town and then my side of town next summer, I hope. So
Now, when you have a city where the Department of Public Works is actually fairly responsive on pedestrian and bicycle issues, what role does your group play then if they're already?
Well, when we first started, the town administration wasn't that as responsive, so we were mostly a bike group at that time, but we started mostly as a protest group and then grew in this nonprofit. But the town now, I think from years of advocacy and understanding that people want to live in a walkable, bikeable community, is really responsive. But the DPW has always been pretty good. One of our board members, who's on the town council, has been really great about getting the state DOT to come in here and help us make plans and how to make stuff better. So we just kind of keep on them. But I think our biggest role sort of for walking is getting people talking about how that's where they want to live. They want to walk to the train station and shopping. That's what they think of when they think about Morristown. They think it's a walkable community. So.
and you talk about you do, fun stuff, going on walks and so on. Why is it crucial that a group like yours mixes in the fun stuff with the advocacy and that sort of grunt work?
Well, I think for us, I mean, we're all volunteers, so we have regular jobs and we want to make it fun for us. But getting people out together, so like when we do this dog walk, we can stop and see that the crosswalk's broken and somebody will call it in. But getting people together, talking for fun stuff like the dog walk or the monthly bike ride, I think it just really gets to people's attitude that's where it's like changing their idea of what they want to live in. Because when we first started, it wasn't very bike or walk friendly. So I think making it fun. When we first started, I contacted other groups, and one group told me, if you make it fun for the first few years, then people like you, and it's easier to get them to understand what your issues are. So, and I think that's true.
You deal with the town, but you also have the state DOT that gets involved once in a while, and the county.
Yeah.
So, what role do those different levels of government play in what needs to get done in Morristown?
Okay, so here's a tiny example of how you have to deal with all those organizations. So we have a pretty great walking and bike path over on the other side of town called the Traction Line that runs from our town to the next town over. So say it's winter time. To get there, you have to walk on a sidewalk that's maybe 200 feet long, but it's like several different agencies. So you have to call like the DOT, the county. There's just to get that one sidewalk shoveled. They don't really work together all the time to understand that that's a way of getting around.
Okay, so pedestrian walking along the sidewalk, he just thinks it's a sidewalk, but it might belong to the three different levels of government.
That road is just the county or whatever. The road is always going to be plowed, but little bits of the sidewalk will never get shoveled unless you keep complaining about it. So I think that's the snow thing is one of our biggest issues right now, because all the sidewalks belong to so many different agencies and businesses, but it is weird that every government section will only do part of theirs or not do it at all. So.
So now you say you made a bit of progress over the years so far.
Yeah.
What are you looking for in the future? What are the big things you'd like to accomplish over, let's say, the next decade?
Well, I think, so we have I think the sidewalks need to be improved in parts of town to make them smoother, easier. I think the crosswalks, we have a lot of crosswalks that cross 4 lanes of traffic like this that don't have signals. And so people are supposed to stop, but sometimes they don't, or motorists are mad that those crosswalks even exist because there's no light there. I think those are something that we need to make safer for people, because when you're crossing 4 lanes of busy, 2 people might stop for you and then the third one doesn't see you. It's really sometimes scary to cross the road. So I think those crosswalks, and there's probably 10 of them in town, I'd like to see something happen with.
We're in Baltimore, Maryland, talking with Jake McKenzie, who's on the City Council for Roanoke Park, California. What's been going on here this week?
Well, what's been going on has been the 14th New Partners for Smart Growth Conference, which the local government commission puts on every year at different locations around the country. And this year we arrived in Baltimore. Lots of sunshine, very cold, grand conference. 1,200 people here from all over the country.
What people talk about this week?
Well, there was a lot of talk about what's happening in the new economy, where the impact of economic expansion, for example, I come from the San Francisco Bay Area, so we are seeing a lot of what is known as displacement. Other people say gentrification or driving people or displacing people. The increase in house prices and rental prices are making it less and less affordable for people who do not have the high salaried jobs and who are, working in the lower paid sector, large scale retail, this type of thing. So there's a lot of conflicts that are going on as we're trying to implement smart growth practices, getting people to live in mixed-use developments, having transit-oriented developments, expanding our transit opportunities. But at the same time, there's a lot of people, families, who are being impacted by these developments and are being, frankly, driven out to areas where they can afford to live, and then they have longer commute times. And so there's a feeling of negativity at the moment, which we are in the smart growth movement trying to resolve. And so there's a lot of discussion about social equity, displacement, and what are we going to do in these years to come.
Now, if we go back a few decades ago, the well-to-do were moving out of the city, leaving the poor in the city, and now we have the well-to-do coming back into the city and driving the poor out of the city.
And it's not just the people who are living in the suburbs who are now older and want to come in for the urban experience. It's the quote-unquote millennials, the young professionals, who actually want to live in an urban environment, who want to live in cities, who don't necessarily want to be driving a car or having to deal with a car. They want walkable, livable. They want to be able to get on the bus or the rapid transit and get to their work and do the things that they enjoy doing. And that is, the dynamic has changed pretty dramatically.
And is part of the problem that walkable places are just so uncommon that they take a premium?
No, the walkable places, in fact, are becoming more common. And I think, one of the things about this conference is that you see examples from all over the country where people have started to put into practice what we were talking about in planning efforts 15 years ago when we first started this process. But are we victims of our own popularity? One could argue yes, that in areas, and I of course am most familiar with the San Francisco Bay Area, Silicon Valley, San Francisco, Oakland, and the huge economic transformations that are happening there. And at the same time, we want to encourage people to take transport, to live in transit-oriented developments, and change their way of life. But when you're doing that, and jobs are being created at a rate that are outrunning our ability to build the housing, and so the market forces then come into effect and start to drive the prices up. And so we're trying to figure out how to balance this.
And how does the situation differ from an area like the Bay Area with having rapid job growth with a place like Detroit that's been struggling a little more and has lost a lot of its population?
Well, from what I understand about Detroit, and certainly I can't speak to that with any degree of local knowledge whatsoever, but I was talking to someone from Lansing, Michigan at lunch today, county treasurer guy, and he was talking about how they are trying to land bank in cities like Detroit and Lansing where there are vacant properties and trying to hold on to that property, use it for urban agriculture, trying to provide a source of good foods to the people who are still living there, but they have sort of it's the obverse side. It's the opposite side of the coin. People can barely give away their houses. Not the case in the San Francisco Bay Area, but what I think we are hoping to see clearly as the economy that there will be jobs back in Detroit that will encourage people to come back, and they will start reoccupying that urban center.
What sort of people come to a conference like this?
There's a mix of people, but to be very straightforward, there's elected officials, there's people in local government and state government and federal government who work at a middle staff and senior staff level where they're trying to implement policies and trying to encourage those of us who are elected officials to put policies into place. And there are people who have, economic interests, people who want to develop properties, who would like to build housing that would be affordable, that would be connected with transit. And we have, I'd say, a plethora of nonprofit organizations, whether it's open space or providing affordable housing or looking at transportation options, making sure that there's social equity built in to our solutions to the problems. So you have this mix of people. I think we all have this goal of a more equitable society, an economically viable society, and an environmentally friendly society, the 3 E's that we talk about frequently. But there's, I think, that sort of coming together of people with common interest, and so you start talking to somebody from Michigan or you start talking to somebody from Hawaii, you have a commonality of interests. And so there's a feeling, an esprit de corps, a camaraderie, whatever cliched phrase or word you want to use. We're together here and we're going away with solutions that we take back home. And a lot of people are coming back next year. And they're looking for more solutions to problems that have emerged. So it's a feel-good environment from my perspective.
And since the first one in San Diego, other than being a whole lot colder in Baltimore in January, what's changed over the years? What do we know now that we didn't know back then? And what new questions have come up?
Well, I think 15 years ago, there was a great deal of suspicion about the social engineering aspects of what we were calling smart growth. That this was the sort of the liberal left, the elitists trying to superimpose their values on the people, on them, on they. And I think what's happened is a realization, particularly given the recession, the Great Recession, that there are economic benefits to a type of approach to growth that doesn't sprawl outwards, it does protect open space, it does allow for economic development to proceed, and at the same time provides a lifestyle that is healthier, walkable, livable, again, another catchphrase that we use. But to me, that has become much more of the common language as we grow and develop in the 21st century in this country.
And you said we have some people from all different levels of government here. What's the role of the different levels of government? The federal government, state government, and then local government like you're involved in. What's the role of each level?
Well, I'll start with the one I understand all levels because I've actually worked in the federal government and I've actually worked in state government, but the last 19 years I've been in local government out in Northern California. We would see ourselves in local government as being in that place where we can actually make decisions that make a difference in our citizens' lives. So in my city, for example, I've helped to create an urban growth boundary around the city. I've helped to create a general plan that promotes smart growth, that makes us more livable and walkable. We are able to take advantage of state programs where we will get technical assistance or we will get financial support, and that varies from state to state. We've just gone through a real pushback in California with redevelopment dollars being taken away from locals, so we don't have the same amount of money for affordable housing that we had 3 years ago. To me, that was a retrogressive step. Other people say not so. But then you have that relationship with the state, and of course in California the state statutes govern the way land use is controlled at the local level, so our general plans come out of the Constitution of the state of California. Now when we're dealing with the federal government, then you're dealing with large block grants, you're dealing with transportation dollars that come through the Highway Trust Fund, and that money comes to the state and from the state to the local metropolitan planning organizations, and then comes down to our jurisdictions at the county and city level. So you have to have an understanding of these mechanisms. But bottom line for me is that innovative work that's going on in climate protection and on these different things we've been talking about, the real action is with local government.
And local government, a lot of this stuff is going to be built by the private sector, working with developers and builders. How does that work out? Do they understand smart growth principles, and how can you work with them?
Well, we find out more and more that as we have worked in the city of Rohnert Park implementing our general plan, which we put in place 15 years ago, that as the state green building standards have become more green, if you will, more sustainable, as we have worked on transportation solutions. We have passenger rail coming in next year in Rohnert Park right through our city, more transit alternatives. And working with the developers in California, the city has control over what is developed. It's not the right of the developers to tell us what they want to do. They have the privilege of developing in our cities in California, and we, using our general plan and other mechanisms, we will work with them certainly, but we do not have to, we don't have to allow everything that they might like to do. So there's a lot of negotiation that goes on, and of course we have citizens who desire different things in our community, and so we have community meetings. And I think ultimately nowadays we are seeing that developers get it.
Visit us on the internet at www.pedestrians.org.